Hello and welcome to Purple POV, the podcast that helps you connect your bold and brave communication strategies to your organisational growth ambitions. This is the launch episode of Purple POV and I am Lucy McCarran, MD of Purplefish. It's only right for the launch episode that I be joined by Purplefish founder, a lady who has a well-established and long-standing career in PR, and is my co-director and very good friend, Joanna Randall.
Hi.
Please tell me and the listeners a little bit about your career and, the history of Purplefish.
Yeah, so I'm Joanna Randall and I am founder of Purplefish, which I founded on my own in 2012. So we've been going since then. Before that,
Don't look old enough.
Too kind. Before that, I've always had a career basically in PR agencies and comms agencies, full service advertising agencies, number of different places. So I think I've been in PR for a grand total of about 30 years.
Wow.
Which is quite a long time. Didn't expect to last longer than 6 months initially.
Very impressive.
But anyway, Purplefish, we've been obviously established since 2012. We're a full service comms PR agency. We have always specialised in technology, property, hospitality, and we also do a lot in the charitable, purpose-driven and public sector, more and more these days, actually. And in 2024, we transitioned to become an employee-owned business. So we have an employee ownership trust as part of our governance structure. So what that effectively means is I am no longer the sole shareholder. Everybody, all of us as a team, are shareholders, and we all work together in a slightly different way, actually, which I love because I've always had a bit of a belief that business, sort of traditional business structures aren't necessarily the best way of operating. And I think that's become a really refreshing way of behaving within our culture. We now all have a bit of an employee owner mindset, business manager mindset, which is great. And that's it really. And obviously, as part of that, you became the MD. So I've shuffled to the side a little bit.
A little bit, tiny bit.
Oh well, I'm happy to shuffle more.
More shuffling. And actually that culture bit is definitely something that gets me quite excited. What some of our listeners may not be aware is quite a substantial part of my career was built in employee experience and employer branding and culture communications. And in fact, what brought us together in terms of me coming on board with Purplefish was, over the years, a few discussions, sometimes late at night at the kitchen table, about how important employee sentiment and employee experience was from a PR perspective. And the fact that a lot of organisations don't actually realise that reputation management, has to be managed from inside as well as outside the organisation. And I think it came to the forefront around the pandemic. It was when we had the Brewdog fallout and the Punks with Purpose with their letter around toxic cultures, which jarred so much with their brand messaging at the time. We kind of thought, actually, this is a really good time to bring our skill sets together. We can offer our clients a lovely blended approach of internal and external activation of our communication messages. And the rest, as they say, is history. So, Jo, we talk a lot about bold and brave communications here at Purplefish, but what does this mean? How do organisations use this to cut through the noise?
So I think for me, bold and brave communications is about standing out, and actually in today's age when we are bombarded by anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 messages a day, that is no mean feat. So I think the only way that you can really stand out is by being a little bit different. We're also in the age of AI, where obviously we are regurgitating lots of the same information time and time and time again. So I think being bold and being brave about what you say is more important than ever.
I was listening to a really interesting talk around AI and creativity the other day, and the whole, the fact that AI is such a helpful tool, but actually it will never come up with anything fresh or new, is why you've got to have that creative and human thinking to layer on top of the brilliance of these tools we now have available to us.
Yeah, I think there's a danger with that, actually, isn't there, in our industry, is that we could become a bit lazy by using those sorts of tools, which are good, definitely for research purposes, and it's great for shortcuts in all sorts of different areas. But at the moment, what it can't replicate is that true creative thinking and bringing together that kind of real human experience to what's going on in the world around us.
And new ideas, something new and fresh. Interesting, yeah. I mean, in terms of what bold and brave looks like, I think I find it quite interesting when organisations and brands are, really doing their insight and then addressing the uncomfortable truth. I think Adobe are doing quite a good job of this in terms of their communications around AI ethics, actually. They talk a lot about responsible AI that is really embedded into all of their features, not just training. And they have these sort of AI ethics principles of openness, transparency, responsibility, which they've been really vocal about, which is quite nice in a time when sort of the big tech businesses are not being quite as outspoken on that topic as perhaps we would like them to be.
Definitely.
So, I think we can all see the value in creative communications, but actually, what's the connection between being bold and brave and achieving your growth ambitions?
Well, I think we do know that PR absolutely does have an impact on the bottom line. It was not always the case when I started out in PR a few years ago, when it was harder to measure, but these days we really can track the external comms, the editorial we get, the mentions we get, the engagement we get. We can really track that back to websites and sales. So I think as far as growth is concerned, it's absolutely one of the most integral and definitely one of the most believable channels if you use it properly, because it's an earned media source, not a paid for one.
And I think, those kind of creative lines in your external marketing, your external communications that really capture people's attention. I think Starling Bank came up with a campaign called Set Your Business Free when they were launching, and that really spoke to small businesses who had largely been ignored by the financial sector until that point. And that was incredibly effective, along with a really good operating model. I think they grew 15% year on year and increased their market share considerably.
I think there's been a few examples, haven't there, of brands being a bit bold and a bit different. I don't know whether you saw it, but there was another one last year where McDonald's used a really clever digital campaign to create an error message and send that out through push notifications, basically trailing whether or not the McRib was going to come back, and that created this whole storm, which they then tongue-in-cheek denied that was coming back. Well, of course, it was all part of a bit of a digital stunt, really, and I just thought that was really creative, and it used a medium, digital comms and push notifications that we're all really used to, but it turned it on its head.
A bit of a fun way.
Yeah, exactly, and captured people's attention, because actually that's what we need to do in comms. We're looking to capture attention.
And I think fun is quite a good, route to people's attention. I think people forget about it, particularly in B2B, but and sometimes in public education as well. McDonald's are good at it, and I suppose in lots of ways they are a fun brand. I don't know if you've seen that Strut Safe campaign, which is all over the bus stops at the moment. I think that's a really nice public awareness campaign. It's so Strut Safe is a online it's a telephone line that women can call if they're feeling unsafe walking home. And the Strut Safe campaign has come around because their research suggests that almost 30% of women don't feel safe going home alone. and they're trying to encourage more women to go to live gigs and music venues and things like that. And but their approach, I just thought, was quite contemporary. I thought strut safe is quite good. It's quite empowering, isn't it? It's not kind of a like, stop doing this, stop doing that. Nice empowering language. It's an illustrative style. It's not like a scared woman. Yeah, kind of quite like that sort of more creative, fun approach to quite a serious topic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can do that, and obviously you have to do it in the realms of what's appropriate and what isn't, depending on what the brand is. But yeah, I think that's a really, really good example. I really like that one as well. I've noticed that. I just think it's quite empowering in its tone, and actually tone of voice and the types of language that we use, like you say. I think that's more important than ever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what did you think of one of the most controversial campaigns that came out last year, which was the launch of the new Jaguar for Type 00, which, was talked about across the media. It got a lot of reaction, great PR response. I believe their creative term for it was exuberant modernism. Not a tiny little just bronze Jaguar anywhere in that campaign, but did it work in terms of the PR response, or was it just woke rubbish, as Elon Musk seemed to think?
Well, I mean, in a way, he's got skin in the game with Tesla. So, in terms of a competitor brand, perhaps he was a bit gutted that he hadn't thought of that sort of thing first. I don't know. But yeah, I thought it was a really smart, standout campaign. And I think it's a good example of doing something different, that you don't necessarily have to have cars in production in this particular case. It was about showing innovative thinking. It was quite conceptual. And I think it was always going to attract people who were really positive and pro that campaign, and people who were against it. So it was always going to polarise views, and I'm sure they were absolutely aware of that. The one thing that I would say about that campaign is it cost an awful lot of money. And if you've got that level of budget, you can have quite a lot of fun and you can command a lot of attention. Clearly, Jaguar is already a global brand. What I think is really interesting about that campaign is what they set out to do, which I do think they achieved, was to get people to take another look at Jaguar. And where it's become quite a heritage brand, and it's been associated with a specific demographic, male, slightly older, I think what they wanted to do, because they realised if they didn't transform and innovate, actually their brand was going to become even more outdated.
Yeah.
So they kind of had to do something a little bit radical. And I thought it was smart. I thought it was good, and it certainly got people talking, which ultimately is what we want in PR.
Well, exactly. And, alienating a few old men, Nigel Farage and Elon Musk, it's not really the end of the world, is it, when you're trying to attract a more younger, more, forward-looking audience? I think that they, the proof's in the pudding. We haven't got the sales figures yet. Are they going to start selling Type 00 and getting back that audience share that they were looking for? But it certainly was bold and brave. I think we can both agree with that.
I think it ticked that box, definitely.
That's definitely a well-known and big, bold brand. But what about in some of the lesser talked about sectors? Is there what sort of campaigns have caught your eye in the property sector, for example?
I think property is an interesting one always, especially because it's always a bit of a bellwether sector for how the economy is doing. And I think the UK over recent years has had a lot of, maybe more downs than ups in terms of property. Obviously, we work in house building sector, but we also work on the commercial property side as well. And I think it's a fascinating sector to be involved in, but it's pretty fast moving. It's really market responsive. So it's pretty tough for the people that operate in that sector. And actually if we're talking about houses, what we're selling is probably that biggest investment that people make in their lifetime. So it's a really considered approach to a sale. It's something that people do think about long and hard. It's not popping out to the shop and grabbing a chocolate bar. You know, it's something that really needs to be well considered. So tying in kind of emotive human interest stories, I think, is really key in this sector. And the one campaign that I've seen in the past few months was at the end of the year, or start of this year, start of 2025, Rightmove did a campaign. And I really liked what they were doing. It was about identifying people who were looking for houses and properties that really responded to their lifestyle choices. So they used some human interest stories. They used, a good example was one where somebody who was really into diving wanted to find a home near somewhere that she could go and do her daily morning dive. So, you know, she had quite specific requirements, and there was a real human interest and a backstory to that. So they led with that human interest side of things. And I think that was a pretty smart thing to do, really, for Rightmove, which is, you know, let's be honest, they are market leader in many respects.
Well, Zoopla have been doing quite a bit of communications recently as well, and I think quite a different approach actually, but tapping into what we've all had envy when we go to other people's houses and you kind of look around and you think, oh God, I wonder how much this place costs. And that's kind of, you know, that sort of humour side of things they've tapped into, which apparently has been quite effective. It has driven quite a few boosts to their website. People sort of look at that advert and think, yeah, I need to think about my next move.
Keeping up with the Joneses, I think that's the modern day equivalent of that one, isn't it?
Basically,
I mean, both of those, what they're doing essentially is they're really tapping into some human behaviours, and then they're turning that into a campaign and creating those messages off the back of it. So yeah, and that's what we advise. It's always the place to start. It's what, you know, who's your audience and what do they want to hear?
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of those executions are very much done in a way where you sort of, you know, we've all been in that situation. You can all relate to it. So we are going to be wrapping up each of our episodes with a segment that we're going to call... What we're going to call it? We're going to call it takeaway tips. And this really is about the fact that we don't just want our listeners to have some interesting inspiration and examples to take away, but we think it would be really helpful for them to have a few actionable tips or ideas that they can actually go away and play with in their own time and think about in terms of bringing it into their own marketing communications, strategies, approaches. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you. What's your top tip? You know, listeners who are thinking about how can we bring a bit more bravery into our communications, you know, where do they get started? What should they be thinking about first?
For me, and the piece of advice that we often give is don't assume you know what your audience wants to hear. And I think that still happens an awful lot. So I think being really true and honest and not assumptive about the campaigns that you push out to your audiences. If you think you know what they want to hear, it's probably not right. So I think being really honest and upfront and being willing to go and talk to your audience and really listen. I think there's still a tendency to broadcast messages out at a target audience, but actually being really honest and being willing to listen to what their pain points are, what is interesting to them, what is not interesting to them, and then responding, not making those assumptions. So that audience insight, the behaviours, what they care about, you know, we call it kind of empathy mapping, but really it's about trying to put yourself into the mindset of your target audience. Get that right, and creative ideas will come, the campaign ideas will flow. If you make those assumptions, then chances are your messages won't land and people won't care about you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always think, You know, what is the problem that's keeping your audience awake at night? It's so easy when you're inside a brand or inside an organisation to become very internalised. You know, this is our product, this is what we need to sell, these are the functions that make this a great product. And actually, until you've put yourself in the shoes of that customer or of that client, of that, you know, the person that needs that, and thought about what problems they have and how your service solves those problems, you know, you're never going to be able to connect with them on a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, people don't really buy brand attributes and product features. It's the sort of Simon Sinek type of thinking, but what they buy really is what it does for them, what it can change, how it can enhance their lives, what it can do to give them an experience. So I think having that human connection is really important.
And what's the story? I mean, you know, those examples that we've just given, they're all stories that have been told, and that's why they're memorable. You know, strut safe. I mean, we all want to, you know, strut around looking great. Brilliant.
Well,
That taps
you do.
that taps into my femininity. Yeah, but you know, the McDonald's story as well, you know, it's just quite funny, and it's a nice story and a nice narrative. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap on today's launch episode. Thank you very much, Joanna. For those of you who have enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe, and you can tune in to future shows via Spotify, Apple Music and YouTube. If you're interested in staying in touch with Purplefish, please follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you'd like to hear more from us, you can sign up to our newsletter via the link in the show notes and via our website. In our next episode of Purple POV, we're going to be delving deep into influencer marketing and the opportunities that presents to amplify your brand growth. I'll be joined by two special guests, Senior Account Manager and Influencer Expert Brianne Mason, along with well-known influencer and content creator Charlotte Anstey, also who you may recognise as a fashion oddity. We're incredibly excited to see you then. Goodbye and see you soon.